Hello everyone, my name is Lucy Oborn. I work for Maxwell Geoservices as the Lease Control Manager, and today we're going to be talking about some of the lease control facilities regarding community consultation. In this webinar on recording community consultation in lease control, we're taking examples mainly from New South Wales in Australia. However, I'm sure you're all aware that there's an increasing focus on social responsibility throughout the world by both government and investor groups. What we're looking at supports this focus in a simple, transparent manner to support company reports and compliance. We're going to be covering off tracking outstanding consultation obligation, which includes reporting, linking key documents to agreements and leases. So this could be your meeting minutes. And for transitional provisions, recording the policy that applies to your lease. A majority of our discussions will be those community groups outside of your immediate landholders, although the lease control process certainly remains relevant, if not more so, for these immediate landholders and other interest groups. Depending on your jurisdiction, you may attract mandatory consultation during the exploration process, which is certainly the case in New South Wales. And in many regions, there's a statutory obligation to consult prior to mining, such as Quebec and at times WA. Each of these drives the cost and success of both mining and rehabilitation. This consultation isn't so much about landholder access approval as ensuring the wider community is satisfied by your proposed operations. However, these processes often don't have a mandatory compliance date that would support entry as an action in lease control. After all, you don't want to water down your compliance date with moving deadlines. For this purpose, lease control comes equipped with a tracking tab on both leases and agreements, which is located under the Actions tab. Acting like all grids in lease control, you can pull a header into the Group By section, and this will assist in filtering data that you see in the grid. And in this case, we've filtered it based on the completed status, and in this case we're only showing these that haven't been completed. The data that's recorded in tracking is quite simple, with dates that you can create and change as required. The only compulsory field is the start date, and the rest is up to you. We recognise that as some dates may be driven by the date you intend to undertake high impact drilling, for example, such as New South Wales, or issue of a rehabilitation and restoration plan, such as in Quebec, some compliance cannot be identified by the outset. Therefore, the description or reference column may refer instead to this trigger, thus explaining why it isn't yet complete nor allocated a follow-up date. You can then see why moving dates apply and why you may not therefore wish to include this in your critical action screen, but this is your choice. The tracking type is a library which you can create and edit to suit your requirements. Although we've used a simple community consultation here in the red circle, and tasks that reflect the New South Wales policy indicated by the yellow arrow, this is all customisable to your requirements. In Quebec, for example, whose mining leases and concessions attract public consultation, alternative terminology may be used. The library controlling the tracking type is located in the settings menu, noting that agreements and leases each have their own tracking type library. From here you can select the tracking type library. This is particularly straightforward. You can create a new tracking type by typing into the top row indicated by the black triangle and then pressing enter on your keyboard to move it into the grid. You can also amend an existing tracking type, however, with all edits in lease control. Please remember that it will flow through to all tracking items past and present that use this particular value. Therefore, edit sparingly. Of course, this tracking has limited use if you can't pull a report on the data. After all, you can use evidence of having completed this consultation with community to mitigate risks of the public review process, as can be the case in Western Australia. Therefore, you can view the incomplete tracking items in the Action browser. simply select tracking on the left. You also have your standard filtering functions for dates and lease manager, together with colour coding, which is based on the follow-up date. More specific data can be extracted from Query Builder, which, as you know, is located under the Tools menu. This is Query Builder, which you may recognise from our other episodes on these training webinars. We're going to learn more of it in the reporting webinar, as it's a very flexible means of extracting vast amounts of data from your database. For our purposes today, the report heading is optional. You can query either agreements or leases, and showing of basic data is optional. Now that show this data refers to that information contained in that main section up the top of each of your lease and agreement records. That's where you record the responsible party, the project, critical dates, primary commodity and a few others. In this case, I only want to do New South Wales titles, so I've entered the locality as a filter. The important part, however, is selecting tracking from the data options on the left. This enables me to enter a filter for specific tracking types, and in this case I've chosen community consultation. Now, just for the record, if you have more than one tracking type that you want to pull in this report, you simply tick the multiple box on the right, and that will then pull up a list of all the different tracking types, and you can go through and tick those that you wish to filter for. I then click on Show Results, and Query Builder produces the results based on the filters. In this case, we've got 10 tracking items. You will see there are a few options from here. However, in this case, we're going to want to export the results to Excel. You have the option of amending this report, of course, including filtering for completed actions where you're required to provide a statement of consultation. You simply enter that into another line item in your filtering. So that takes care of our biggest section today on tracking. Next, a brief look at linking key documents to your agreements and leases. As we saw earlier, one of the tracking items has been completed and there are related meeting minutes. Under the General tab, we have a sub-tab called Documents. This is where we can create a link to critical documents for ease of reference. For example, in this case, we've created a link to the meeting minutes that was referred to in the tracking item. The critical thing to remember is that LeaseControl is not attaching the document to the database. So in other words, the access to the document is determined by your existing protocols, as it simply points LeaseControl to its current location. For example, if your server is broken down into several drives or files and you only have access to drives 1, 2 and 3, but not 4, you cannot open a document linked to LeaseControl if it is saved on number 4. You can see in LeaseControl that there's a link. You can see the details as entered into LeaseControl, you just can't open it. So in this way, LeaseControl cannot be used to bypass your current Windows security settings. And further to that, there's no duplicate documents created that can take up valuable memory space, generally cause error and confusion, and otherwise not adhere to your set document protocol. To link up a new document, click in the first row and a little icon will appear. Clicking this will open up a browser screen that looks much like your Windows Explorer. To link a document, simply locate the document and double click on it. If you want to link to a folder, simply open the relevant folder and then click Open. This will return you to the LeaseControl screen where you can complete the remaining 2 fields that you may require and then press Enter on your keyboard to move the information into the grid. As always, please remember to click OK or Apply at the bottom of your LeaseControl screen to save your changes. If you press Cancel, the window will close and it will not save your changes. From here, you can open the document or folder simply by double-clicking on the relevant document name. Incidentally, and a little cheat, you can change this link to a web address. Don't click on the icon with the three little dots that we did earlier. Simply highlight the text in the field, then paste in a web address. If you try to do this through the other screen, it will simply try to download that particular site into your local drive, which isn't of any help. That said, if the website changes, your document will be lost. They take care of linking key documents. Now, what can cause a great deal of confusion and error is trying to check which piece of policy or legislation applies to each lease under transitional provisions. You may know the legislation and policy because you're very well acquainted with the lease, but what about the next person after you? And what about when you're on leave, such as annual leave? And I'm sure we all like to take that. You saw earlier I had created a list to ensure that I tick all the boxes under a particular policy, which you may wish to do in the case of exploration or mining approvals. But one day, someone is going to need to validate what you do. So you need to create a record that will help them do this. Alternatively, maybe you don't want to record all the information in tracking as it's not yet relevant, which makes it even more critical to record the relevant policy. Under the General tab, you have a Categories sub-tab. Consider this a tagging system. You can tag leases and agreements and then pull reports based on a particular tag. In this instance, we're concentrating on the Community Consultation Policy 3.1. To add a category to a lease is very simple case of selecting the next row indicated by the yellow arrow and selecting a category from the drop-down menu. Very easy. The categories is controlled by a lease library that applies to both leases and agreements. The library controlling categories is located under the Settings menu. Select Libraries, then Leases, and from here you can select the category library. It's very straightforward. You can create a new category by typing into the top row and pressing Enter on the keyboard to move it into the grid. And you can also amend existing categories. However, again, with all edits. Remember that it will flow through to all leases and agreements, past and present and archived that use this value. So be very careful. The value column is the value that you will see in your lease and agreement screen, whereas the description column is other reference that you may require. For example, in the first row, Community Consultation Policy 1.9, we've provided the web address to the policy document. However, in the second row, the Community Consultation Policy 3.1, we have provided the effective date. How you wish to use these fields is entirely up to you. That takes care of everything. There we go, we have all the arrows clicking through that. That takes care of everything that we wanted to go through, but the last thing I wanted to remind you is that the Comments tab on both leases and agreements is a great place to store some critical data due to its flexibility and free-form nature. So please feel welcome to use that at will. So that's all on today's webinar. The email is there if you have any queries regarding this webinar, or if you require further information on LeaseControl or other systems developed by Maxwell Geoservice that are complementary to this system. We've got off-the-shelf and tailor-made programs and can customise any of the solutions, including LeaseControl, where your company has specific requirements. We also conduct one-on-one training and mentoring to help you tailor the many existing features of LeaseControl to suit your operations. Have a lovely evening, everyone, and I look forward to speaking to you at the next webinar.